It is Thursday, June 8th, 2023, and you're now listening to the MMA Eco Live podcast. And I'm your host, Chris Presnell, here from beautiful Portland, Oregon, coming at you, here to talk about the latest in Asian MMA news, folks. So, busy weekend coming up. Of course, even right now as we speak, we've got PFL going on, a couple Asian fighters competing there. But if you have not already, if you enjoy the podcast, definitely give me a subscribe. Would really appreciate that. Like the video as well. But let's go ahead and get into it. And what I'll do here is I'll just kind of go through the lineup of Asian MMA events for the weekend, everywhere from one fight night to 11 to the UFC pay-per-view and everything in between. And then I will answer your questions after I go through the schedule. So any questions that you have about Asian MMA, anything about MMA or outside of MMA even, but keep in mind that my expertise is more with the Asian MMA side. And obviously, as you interact with your fellow MMA fans, try to keep things civil, keep things kind. But let's get into the schedule, shall we? So coming up first is, let's see. First up, we've got one fight night 11. So this is not necessarily like the all-time strongest card that One Championship has put on for their Amazon Prime shows, but a couple pretty cool things here and there that I want to draw some attention to. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and we can go through this fight card. So let's take a look here at the latest in IT issues. I thought I had this figured out. All right. So, guys, once again, I'm failing all of you and having some issues here. I will fix this by next week, I promise. I feel like everyone watching this has had to endure like so many awkward moments of me not being able to share my screen, but I will fix that for next week. So let's take a look. I'm just going to kind of read through some of the MMA fights on this card. The main fight, honestly, that I'm the most excited for this One Championship event is Hu Yong versus Woo Sung Hoon. This is it's technically a 135-pound fight, but takes place in one's flyweight division. And between two younger, pretty heavy-handed, good prospects out of China and Korea. So Hu Yong he's a 10-4 fighter, 27 years old, and he is coming off of a win over Geje Estacio. My Tagalog is not that great, but he is coming out over a knockout over the former flyweight champion Woo Sung Hoon, coming off over a TKO over Yuya Wakamatsu. So both guys have a lot of promise in the division. They've had a lot of knockout wins in between them. Kind of maybe the future of the division. So I'm really excited for this fight, guys. I'm not sure who's going to take it. It looks like Woo Sung Hoon, he trains at Team Mad. Those guys are always a lot of fun. And then Hu Yong trains, let's see, where does this guy train? One of the Chinese fighters I'm not as familiar with. It says he trains out of Fighting Bros Club, which is in Beijing. So not a lot of like high-level representation from that gym. So kind of cool to see him on that platform. Just looking over some of his previous wins, he has some wins over some pretty good fighters. He's got a win over Huyushibai Chuha-Yifu, who's a pretty solid fighter, although that came through an illegal slam. He's got a win over Liu Bo-Win in his 5th fight. He fought Shang Zhifa in just his 4th fight. So pretty solid fighter. Interested to see how far he can go. Woo Sung Hoon looks good as well. Also on this card, another fight that I am excited for is the Kwon Won Il fight. He will be fighting Artem Balak, who I believe is maybe ranked 4 or 5 in One Championship's bantamweight division. So Kwon Won Il, a really long, lengthy guy, a lot of knockouts, although also some good chokes that he has in his arsenal. But he's coming off a win over Mark Abelardo and fighting a pretty good Russian guy. So let's see what he can do. His last loss was against Fabricio Andrade. So let's see if he can get a second crack at the title. There's only two other MMA fights at this event. There's Mansur Malachiev against Jeremy Miato of Philippines, and then Ilya Fraimanov, who had a really great debut win last year. He is going to be fighting a Mongolian guy, Shinachagta Zoltsetseg. Nice. 26-year-old, and fought almost exclusively for one championship. Wins over Ma Jiawin, Ali Mohammed, Li Hyunjin, and Akuri Ronda. So he's going to be fighting Ilya Fraimanov. This is kind of a strange fight. Fraimanov coming off of a big win by knockout in his debut. Zoltsetseg coming off a loss. Granted, it was a DQ loss, but he's not in the top 5. Just kind of a strange fight overall. Kind of makes me feel like one championship maybe had a hard time finding an opponent for Fraimanov, which would make sense given what he was able to do in his first fight. But kind of a strange fight. I would think Fraimanov should take this, but we shall see and wait for an upset. So that is one Fight Night 11. Also, tomorrow we've got SOMA Fight Series, which is an event in Indonesia run by the SOMA Fight Club. We've also got Black Combat has an event this weekend. Legend FC is back promoting some MMA fights in Bangkok. We do also have AFC 25, which is a pretty good Korean promotion. They are back in Vietnam. So interestingly enough, this Korean promotion, AFC, has kind of decided to invest a little bit in the Vietnamese MMA scene. And so they'll go across the ocean and they'll hold events in Ho Chi Minh City. Sometimes we'll have some Vietnamese talent, otherwise just kind of some general Asian talent, some Korean fighters. Not a whole lot of standout Vietnamese fighters so far, but eventually, hopefully they'll be able to give some opportunities for some up and coming guys. That in and of itself, it makes me really interested to watch these shows. Although I will say I'm a little bit disappointed with this event because there's only one Vietnamese fighter at AFC 22. So it's a very strange card, if you ask me. A couple Brazilian guys. Looks like there is a couple Filipino guys, Mongolian fighter, Pakistani fighter. No one that really stands out to me. I would say Choi Hong-gil probably stands out the most, but he's taking on an 0-1 Brazilian fighter. Very strange. And then in the main event, you've got Hong Jun-young fighting Marjan Monahan out of the Philippines. I feel like this should be a somewhat easy win for Hong, but we'll see. And then co-main event, we've got a flyweight fight between one veteran, Renee Catalan, fighting Robson de Oliveira for the flyweight belt. So you got Philippines versus Brazil for the AFC belt. So very interesting card here. Not really sure what to make of it. I will probably just catch the replay on that and see if there's any standout performances. But there is one Vietnamese fighter on here. His name is Huy Huang Phan, and he is taking on Pablo Eduardo, who is a 3-0 Brazilian fighter. That's a bantamweight. So AFC, that usually airs on their YouTube channel. If you look them up, you should be able to find it. But I will be catching the replay from that. One of the probably top Asian events that I'm looking forward to all weekend is One Fight Night 69. So this is their one show a month that is actually live, featuring their title fights or bigger fights. So on Saturday, they're going to have 3 fights aired live on their YouTube channel. They're going to have 2 title fights and then an international showcase fight. So the first title fight is between Dwi Atno Retno Wulan, who is the strawweight champion. She's going to be taking on Angie Mondagi. And so this is great to see some Indonesian women fighting for a belt. Wulan, the champ, is 4-1. Mondagi is 3-0. Interested to see just, what kind of performances they can have, what kind of fight. It's always interesting. It feels like sometimes the women's side lags behind the men's side a little bit. So it's great that these Indonesian women are getting platform to compete, improve themselves, and let's see what happens. And then in the co-main event, co-main and main event, we've got two Road to UFC veterans. The other title fight is Anga Hans fighting Muhammad Hanwa for the lightweight belt. Hans won the belt a couple months ago. And then in the main event, very interesting fight that I don't really know what to make of. We're going to have Rama Supandi fighting Govind Ale Singh of India. So if you know name Sumesh Kamra, he is an Indian guy who has a lot of hands in different places in the Indian MMA scene. Well, he has partnered up with One Pride MMA to basically connect One Pride with a lot of Indian fighters. So you're going to see a lot of Indian fighters going over to One Pride, which I think is great. Both of these markets are kind of at similar places in their development, and you're going to get to see a little bit more international fights with One Pride, which I think is something that they've really been lacking, is how do their fighters stack up against fighters from other countries. So this is a great start. Rama Supandi is former champion with One Pride and also Road to UFC veteran. He's going to be taking on Govind Ale, who is 6-2 in the flyweight division. Interestingly enough for him, he has not competed since 2019. So his last fight was for One Warrior Series. Other than that, he's fought for like Super Fight League, Kumite One League. That was their one show, their one like live pro show. Interesting. So yeah, his last fight almost about 3.5 years ago with One Warrior Series, where he lost against a Vietnamese guy. But he's back. Interesting to see how he's developed and also making the jump over to Indonesia. So that's a very interesting fight. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the partnership between One Pride and Indian MMA, what that will become, what kind of fighters are able to go over there and compete. I think it's a really good partnership. So, sorry, I forgot to put up the One Pride banner. So One Pride MMA is on their YouTube channel. You do have to pay $1 a month, but definitely worth it considering you get 4 events broadcast every Saturday. So lastly, let's talk about UFC 289. So the only fight on this card featuring an Asian fighter is Ariqi Lung versus Ayman Zahabi. Ariqi Lung is on a 2-fight win streak, and he's been at Fight Ready putting in the rounds, and I think he's starting to find his stride. There was a little bit of confusion. Is he a flyweight? Is he a bantamweight? But fortunately, he has decided to stay at bantamweight, which I think is a much better move for him. And as long as he can feel like he fits the mold and the frame for bantamweight, which he's a pretty rangy guy, I would think that eventually he should be able to fill that out pretty well. But he's fighting Ayman Zahabi, who's a little bit older than him, but kind of having a resurgence in his career. Pretty good striker. So we'll see what kind of pressure Ariqi Lung is able to put on Zahabi, if he's able to use his wrestling at all. But this should be an interesting fight. I'm not really sure what to make of it just yet. Of course, Zahabi is coming off of that win over Ricky Tercios. And yeah, I think it should be a good fight. Interested to see what kind of improvements Ariqi Lung has made. Sometimes when a fighter makes a move to a new gym, you don't necessarily see a lot of improvement from them until a couple fights into their tenure with that gym. So by now, this is probably his second or third fight with Fight Ready, and I'm hopeful, interested to see if they've really been able to rub off on him, and he's going to start to really bloom as a fighter. He's still only 27 years old, so he has a lot of space and a lot of time to grow into a more mature fighter. So that is UFC 289. Aside from that, a couple odds and ends. I mentioned Black Combat, Legend FC. Also, there's a promotion launching in Kazakhstan this weekend called Nomad Fighting. And then tomorrow night from Japan is going to be an event called Gladiator 22. Looked through that fight card. There wasn't a whole lot that really jumped off the page to me, but you can look at that for yourself. Watch it on the YouTube channel and see if anything interests you there. So, well, without further ado, I will go ahead and hop into your questions. Although I do need to say something real quick. So I did see that Song Yadong has been posting that he would be fighting on the UFC 282 pay-per-view card. He posted that on some Chinese social media like Bilibili. And so after looking into that, I did find out that, yeah, so he has gotten a contract to fight Rob Font at UFC 282, which only makes sense because Rob trains out of Boston. So very logical fight. Both guys are just one number away from each other in the rankings. Makes a lot of sense rankings wise. So I know last I had heard, I don't believe Fontside had received a contract, but that could have changed. The fight is definitely in the works. And you saw Marcel Dorff, he posted about that this morning as well. So that fight, I would expect you'll hear more about that in the next couple days. Hopefully it will be official. So yeah, that Song Yadong versus Rob Font in the works for UFC 282. So let's take a look at your questions. Feel free to shoot more. All right, Rio. So last week I mentioned suffering from success, which means UFC product itself not improving due to lack of competitors and having a built-in fan base that will watch even if the cards are bad. Okay, yeah. So you said like UFC 289, where the UFC is pretending like it's good, where it's really bad besides Oliveira and Dariush. Well, I mean, it's hard to hate on the main event. Like Amanda Nunes versus Arena Aldana, that's going to be a great fight, right? Amanda Nunes usually in pretty good fights. Arena Aldana pretty much always in good fights as well. Aldana, in my opinion, is the most deserving contender at bantamweight. She's never fought for the belt. She's never fought Nunes. So I feel like this is like one of the best fights that could be made in women's MMA right now. I'm really excited for that fight. I am excited for the Dariush versus Oliveira fight. But you're right, like the card does not jump out off the page to you in terms of star power for sure. When I look over this card, I think that at the end of the day, everyone that watches this event is going to be really glad that they did, because it feels like there's going to be a lot of really entertaining matchups. I mean, you got Dan Ige versus Nate Landwehr. I bet even like the Mike Malott versus Adam Fugit card or fight, that's going to be pretty good too. So from an entertainment standpoint, I think it'll be pretty good. But I totally understand, and I feel like it's like really annoying that the UFC expects us to pay $80 for that card. They earlier this year, someone from ESPN was like, "We're raising the prices because we feel like the the value that is provided through a UFC pay-per-view is really undervalued." But then, like, I mean, maybe from an entertainment standpoint, it'll deliver, but like people don't tune into a card because of potential entertainment. They tune into a card for stars. That's why they tune into the event. So like, if the UFC is at all surprised or offended that people don't want to spend $80 to see Adam Fugit versus Mike Malott and Eric Anders versus Marc-Andre Barrios, like, I don't know why they would be surprised about that. And it does feel a little bit insulting that all these fights are on the main card. I think it is just a little bit of a problem of oversaturation is the thing. I would love to see the UFC drop off just a couple events per year and then just maybe like trim down their roster by 50 fighters or so and just really like ensure that every single pay-per-view card, top to bottom, is totally stacked, all 5 fights deep. It feels like every year there's probably like 3 or 4 pay-per-views that really just like the main card is just really lacking. And for that kind of frequency to have like a bad pay-per-view main card, I know when we say something is bad, you kind of have to define what you mean by that. But I feel like a lack of competition is hurting the UFC a little bit. And we'll see what PFL can do. I think that the PFL could have an opportunity to challenge the UFC a little bit in the next couple of years. I have some big questions about that as well. Not totally sold on that, but I am wondering about that. But I think lack of competition is a big thing. And yeah, I think it's just oversaturation. So yeah, I think I see what you're saying though. Who do you favor in the matchup between Rinya Nakamura and Fernie Garcia? I definitely favor Nakamura in that fight. I feel like he is like the full complete package: wrestling, grappling, striking, strength and conditioning. I feel like he's got it all. I feel like he's going to overwhelm and probably take out Garcia in the first or second round, but should be really exciting. From Edgelord, so why does Sean Strickland main event fight night cards? I personally am not a fan of his fighting style. I honestly feel like he's willing is one thing. He's willing to fight on a week's notice, and he's Las Vegas based. So if you're in a pinch and you need someone to main event your UFC Apex card, Sean Strickland is just the guy that you can always just slide right in there. I think that's honestly a big part of it. I think they know that Sean Strickland is not the most exciting fighter, but they do know that he does have a lot of personality. So I think he's got that going for him. And who knows, maybe the UFC is looking at their numbers, and even though we complain about Sean Strickland main events, maybe they do actually pretty well from the numbers standpoint. But man, he's just always right there. He's right down the road, ready to hop in any UFC main events. I think that's a big part of it. Asking about having an All Japan inaugural flyweight championship. They desperately want the Japan market. Hey, I'm at least encouraged to see Bellator like pushing harder and harder for a market outside of the US or Europe. I'm happy to see that they're trying to bring in more Japanese fighters. Although I thought that Takahashi was under contract with Ryzen, so I'm not really sure how that's working out, if he is actually now a Bellator fighter or if it's kind of like one of these co-promoted fights where they're sort of lending him to Bellator. I'm not really sure how that's working, but I'm just happy to see more Asian fighters compete under the Bellator banner. I think if Bellator wants to grow, then they need to start trying to push into some new markets. So yeah, I'm happy to see it. Saw Eddie Cha with Arichi Lung. He's Henry Cejudo's striking coach. Does that not matter against Zahabi, who trains with GSP? I'm not really sure what you're getting at in terms of like having I'm not really sure what you're getting at with that comparison. But I mean, yeah, you're right. Eddie Cha is Arichi Lung's striking coach, and he's running the pipe in there with Henry Cejudo, John Jones. Who else is in there? Balajin used to be there, but I don't think he's there anymore. I think he's there in Thailand. But a lot of good guys at Fight Ready. I think that Eddie Cha is definitely an underrated striking coach. Oh geez, here we go. Why do you think a lot of people want Zhang Weili to lose? I've seen many people say Lemos doesn't stand a chance. It'd be fun. Yeah, I have not seen that myself personally. I don't think a lot of people want her to lose. Can One Pride and One ever co-promote with their ironic name similarity? Who's the real one, right? No, yeah, they're never going to co-promote for sure. If Tyson Nam loses to Azat Maxim, do you think that'll be the last we see Tyson Nam? I think so. He's getting older. I think that'll probably be the last we see. You are the only Westerner in the exclusive Weili Weibo private chat. How do you manage that? Oh, I love it. Of course, if you don't know, like in WeChat, you can literally just like highlight things and translate, and it'll translate it like message by like I only have to click it once, and it'll just go through and like translate. So that's nice. I can also pick up some things here and there, but like it's honestly a really helpful chat to be in. I don't go through every message, and of course, like when I'm awake and people are like messaging a lot, or when I'm usually asleep when people are messaging a lot, so there's that. But yeah, I'm in a couple groups on WeChat for MMA fans, and it really helps me to like find a pulse on things. So I'm really happy to be in there. Do you consider Whaley a technical fighter? I do. Saw a JHK interview with Reed, and she said that Whaley is just a forward-moving brawler. No, that's not true. We know that is not true. What is your opinion on the graphic that the UFC showed? That one of the cons of one is that it's 80% Asian. Seems like a lack of self-awareness due to them having a road to UFC. You know, I thought that was put out by the PFL. I'm pretty sure that was put out by the PFL. Because you want to know how I know that? Is because like one of the categories was like technology, aka smart cage. Like the graphic was using the qualifier of, do these promotions have a smart cage? And of course, every single promotion was no, except for PFL. And so I'm pretty sure PFL put out that graphic to kind of compare itself against other promotions, which of course is not, it was kind of silly, but I thought so too. Like when it was saying that a fan base is 80%, or what was it, like the roster or fan base is 80% Asian. What did you say? First of all, I don't think that on the MMA side, I don't think that 80% of one championship fighters are Asian. I think it's way less than that now. There's way more like European and Brazilian fighters in one championship. I'd have to look at that. I'd have to look at my roster sheet, but I think that it's becoming less and less Asian. But like I thought that was a little bit belittling of Asian fighters for sure, because like I'd have to find the original graphic. I know JHK put that graphic out there. Let me see if I can find that. Might take me too long. Anyways, I know what you mean. If you, here we go. Anyways, okay. Well, I'm going to spend too much time looking for that graphic, but I know it was totally unfair. And it's like in Asia, there are so many countries, and the fact that PFL tried to like use that to like discredit was really confusing. I'm not really sure what they were getting at with that graphic. Why do you think that Dana White gave Jared Gordon a fight contract after being KO'd by Bobby Green, then blamed it on Jared Gordon? Seems incredibly hypocritical, if that's the right word. Someone dropped the ball there. Someone, both in commission and on the UFC side, totally dropped the ball. I think it's not that Jared Gordon deserves none of the blame, but there should be a process that should be able to know that right away. Like who, I know, I was like totally confused by that as well. I'm with you. That should have been caught so quickly and easily. I don't know if Jared Gordon gave, or not necessarily him. I'm not suggesting he did, but did someone provide like false information to be like, oh yeah, he's good to go, we're fine? But that was some kind of lack of oversight at the higher levels. I don't know how that happened, because that's not a usual thing that happens. Of course, he did have the Michael Bisping and coming into the UFC Shanghai main event debacle, but that usually doesn't happen. They usually catch stuff like that. So I was confused about that, just like you all. Want to know what Lemos has to offer Whaley that Whaley hasn't seen before? Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, honestly, what her path to victory is either. She hits hard, that's for sure. Oh, how were you able to be a part of that Weibo chat group? It was, yeah, I mean, someone invited me. I have a lot of friends across social media and on Chinese social media. Someone invited me. When all is said and done, is Rinya still going to end up as the best prospect and tournament winner from Road to UFC? A U23 freestyle gold medalist and a great mindset if you've seen his videos. Yeah, I agree, especially from the first season of Road to UFC. Time will tell. I mean, it's hard to say that when none of these guys have fought in the UFC yet. Although those finals fights were technically UFC fights, but they haven't fought anyone already in the UFC roster right now. I would think I'm wondering to see what Anshul Jubilee's ceiling is. I think he could go pretty far. I think Rinya Nakamura is probably going to go farther quicker. I think he's going to have a pretty good run right off the start. Where I think Anshul Jubilee, he's going to probably I'm not sure. I'm interested to see how they'll match him up right away. Hopefully, we'll get to see Anshul at UFC Singapore in August. But yeah, those two guys are really, really good, and curious to see how far they can go. I think Lee Jung Young could also go pretty far, but I think I need to see more from him to really determine that. But yeah, a lot of killers from that first season. I think this second season could produce some pretty good guys too, especially at flyweight and at bantamweight for sure. Let's see. So the 80% Asian thing seems like a belittling of Asian fighters. Do you agree that Asians don't get a fair shake in MMA in general? Oh, yeah. I did. I did kind of cover that just now, but do they get a fair shake? I think they do and they don't. When you say Asian fighters, it's like Korean fighters have a really good reputation right now. Japanese fighters usually have a pretty good reputation. Chinese fighters, their reputation was not good for a long time, but it's like quickly getting better and better and better. But a lot of fan bases in MMA in Asia are not really represented right now. In fact, I'm just putting the finishing touches on a video right now, probably like the beefiest video that I've ever done. About a 25-minute video on how like an MMA market can develop from like the very first step all the way to becoming a global superpower. So if Cambodia or Vietnam wanted to start MMA from square one all the way to being like having UFC champions, multiple ranked fighters, everything in between, what are all the steps they have to go through? And there's just a lot of Asian countries that have not really made it that far on that scale. Countries like Laos, like Vietnam, Bangladesh. Bangladesh is like what, the fourth or fifth largest country in the world in terms of population. Not sure on that. Don't quote me on that. But one of the larger countries in the world in terms of population, and they literally have like almost nobody fighting in MMA right now. Pakistan, again, like deeply underrepresented. Starting to get some guys trickling in there, but for the most part, like, yeah, some of the biggest countries in the world and a lot of these countries in Asia have almost no representation. So if a fighter from Pakistan all of a sudden shows up and won championship, I think most people are not always going to like bet on them, give them a fair chance, just because like that fighters of that reputation from that lineage have not really proven themselves. And you have to prove yourself in order for people to really have a lot of confidence, you know, if they don't already know who you are and what you can do. So things will eventually change. And I cover all this in the video. I kind of work through and like show you like different phases of development. But I think that's wise. Just so many countries have not fared well on a high stage. But if you're talking about like Korea and Japan, I feel like people have a lot more respect for those, and China is getting there as well. Here's my question. Is the UFC ignoring medical suspensions and they are still putting on bad cards? Maybe you can explain that craziness. I don't think that, if you're asking the question, did they need someone to fight Jim Miller really badly enough to where they ignored a medical suspension? I would doubt that they like blatantly ignored a stated medical suspension to where they needed someone that badly. I feel like usually when they're in that situation, they're going to make some weird mismatch, or they're going to sign somebody new to the promotion just so they can fight, which is what they eventually did with Jesse Butler fighting Jim Miller. They signed him just for that spot. So I don't know that they necessarily. I don't think that there is a medical suspension out there. I would be interested to look at that if there was a stated medical suspension for Jared Gordon. But I wonder if something was fudged or messed up within the commission where they didn't issue a suspension, or something wasn't communicated well. But the whole situation is a little bit strange to me, for sure. Are you a fan of one-night tournaments like the one MMA on Point mentioned about Igor Vovchanchin? Would that be viable in China where there is no commission? Well, what China does a lot of times is they host these really big tournaments over the course of like 3, 4, 5 days. It has been a couple years since they did that, but that used to be like all the rage. Like CKF, Chinese Kung Fu Federation, CMSL, or Dacheng Wui would do these, like, they'd have these super events over the course of a couple days where they'd have 32 fighters in a bracket, and they would compete a bunch of times over the course of a couple days. That's why you have so many fighters coming from China into the UFC who have like 25, 30, 35 fights on their record, and they're just like 22 years old. So they accrue experience really quickly because of those tournaments. I think one-night tournaments are fun, but first of all, I don't think anything past. I think they should have a max of like 2 rounds. So there are a lot of different formats that you can do them. Invicta, the way that they do them is that they will fight like a 1-round exhibition fight for the first 2 rounds, and then fight a 3-round pro fight for the finals. I think that's a pretty good way to do it. The problem with one-night tournaments, if the fighters are spending a ton of time in the cage, is that the chance of injury is just so high, and by the time you get to the finals, the path of the tournament is so not clean that it's almost, is this really even valid if we had to have a lot of substitutes? So that can definitely happen, and that honestly happens a lot in some of these Chinese tournaments over the course of a couple of days. Is they'll be like, sometimes there'll be 3 3-minute rounds each fight. Sometimes there'll be even 3 5-minute rounds several times over the course of a couple of days, and that's just too much. And so there'd be a lot of substitutes. And in that case, I almost just feel like it's not even worth it, because it's like all these fighters are hopping into the tournament midway through. So I'm not a huge fan of that. I think the way that I like the way that Invicta does it, to try and minimize injury, but still be able to collect all these, like 8 fighters into the Phoenix series in one night. So that's my favorite way to do it, is these like 1-round fights that are exhibition fights. Otherwise, you're also going to have a lot of fighters accrue losses pretty quickly as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about them. They are exciting. I went to the Bantamweight Invicta Phoenix series in Kansas City a couple years ago. The same event that had Julia Stoliarenko fighting Lisa Verzosa in one of the best fights ever, one of the bloodiest fights ever. And that was really fun. I went there with my sister and brother-in-law, and it was fun going to like this one-night tournament, because they didn't really know who any of the people were, my relatives. They didn't know who anyone was, but throughout the night, they get to know people. They've seen some fighters make the walk to the cage 3 times. So they're kind of starting to see like, oh, I think this person's going to win, or that person's going to win. So it was really fun, first of all, going to a one-night tournament live, also with people who are not necessarily MMA fans, because it was really easy for them to get kind of drawn into the tournament. So that was pretty cool. I do like it in that sense. Let's see, what else we got? Earlier meant that Zahabi has a game plan advantage over Arichi Lung. Do you think that Zahabi game plans are considerably better since they have trained GSP? Well, you can't just have a coach that's good at game planning. You have to have a fighter that's skilled and able to implement that game plan. So with GSP is also like one of the best fighters and athletes we've ever seen. he had a really good connection with Zahabi. Even with Ayman Zahabi being brothers with his coach, Faraz Zahabi, that doesn't always just equate to success. Just because you have a really good coach that's game planning, you also have to have a fighter that's like skilled enough to be able to pull it off to perfection. So I think that's the other side of the equation. To build on Bernie's question, how would you organize a one-night MMA tournament if you were a promoter and all the power and structure how you want? Yeah, I think I answered that question with the kind of shorter fights leading into the longer fights. What are your thoughts on genuinely elite talent like George Hardwick and Shamil Gaziev potentially earning worse contracts than the Road to UFC winners? Well, consider that for Road to UFC, they have to fight 3 times before officially signing with the UFC, where Contender Series, they only have to fight once. So there is that side of it, and there's fewer of those contracts being given out. However, I do think that George Hardwick deserves to be signed directly to the UFC. Obvious, like, yeah, totally. If anyone from like the announced Contender Series roster so far deserves to be in the UFC right away, it's George Hardwick for sure. I wonder if it's just one of these things of like, what is he, a lightweight? Like, lightweight is just so stacked and competitive that the spots to get into the lightweight roster are really, really limited and really competitive. So that's why he's having to go through Contender Series. I don't know if there's a whole lot of truth to that. I kind of almost wish that like someone from UFC London would fall out and then they could just tap him as a replacement. That would make a lot of sense to me. But, you know, it's interesting because yesterday and today we've seen 5 female fighters being signed to the UFC just between today and yesterday. Had like Shauna Bannon, Montserrat Rendon, Luana Santos, Melissa Dixon, Jacqueline Cavalcanti, all been signed to the UFC in the last 2 days. And you think about women's bantamweight, you know, how many more spots? That's like wide open. That is not competitive at all. And if you have fighters that are like pretty good, then they should probably just get signed to the UFC. And you look at those fighters' records too. Most of them are like 5-0, 5-1, somewhere along those lines, 5 or 6 fights, and they're being signed directly to the UFC. But it's just like the divisional landscape is so different between women's bantamweight and men's lightweight that I think it's just a lot more competitive to get in there. But that doesn't change my belief that Hardwick should be signed directly to the UFC. That's just how I feel about it. What do you think of DC saying Jim Miller does not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame since it's just time served? Miller fights in the deepest division for the longest time. Shouldn't he deserve that rec? I do think so. So people are also bringing up the argument of Donald Cerrone being in the Hall of Fame. I think Cerrone's probably a little more accomplished. He has fought for some titles. He's fought in a lot of main events. And Jim Miller, I'm looking through his resume here just to see who he's beat. I remember he had a pretty big co-main event fight against who was that against? Excuse me. So yeah, he's been in the UFC since October of 2008. Some of his standout wins, Gleison Tebow. Okay, he does have a win over Charles Oliveira. Granted, that was 13 years ago. He's got a win over Charles Oliveira, so that's aged really well. He's got wins over Melvin Gillard, Joe Lazon. Got 2 wins over Joe Lazon, Takanori Gomi, Thiago Alves, Clay Guida. He does have a win over Cowboy Cerrone. So that is a tough one. That's a tough one for me. It's like, what are Jim Miller's accolades? Obviously, there's time in the octagon, wins, things like that, but we'll see. I think especially if Jim Miller gets a fight at UFC 300, I think we should just put him in the UFC Hall of Fame, right? Like, he totally has the reputation, 39 years old, and he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, guys. It's not like, and one of those was over Cowboy Cerrone. Granted, Cowboy right at the end of his career there, but yeah, I think so. That's a tough one for me because he doesn't have the accolades that Cowboy has, but he does have a lot more going for him. I can see the argument to not have him inducted in the Hall of Fame, but I would just rather have more people in the Hall of Fame, especially like Jim Miller for sure. Kendris, hey, when's the next Road to UFC? And do you know where it will be? I really enjoy those fights because of skill and new faces. Also, what do you think of my dream booth of Senko, Gooden, and oh gosh, well that's my dream. That's my dream commentary booth too. You just named my three commentary favorites. Of course, I would have to throw Anik in there as well. John Anik is if I could have a 4-person commentary booth, which would be a disaster, but I'd throw Anik in there as well. So yeah, next Road to UFC will be probably not official, but probably August 26th. And UFC is looking to go to Singapore for a fight night card on August 26th. That's not official yet. Or I have heard that the Singapore event for UFC is official. It hasn't been announced yet, but I've heard that that's signed with the location. But Road to UFC probably going to be there. I think they have to assess if the fighters are all ready to go for that, since it is a pretty quick turnaround of 3 months. Not sure if that would be before or after the UFC event on the Friday or Saturday before, but most likely look for it to be at that time. All right, got a couple more here. Oh, and Kendrick, you're also asking, did you listen to Jillian Robertson on Joe Rogan? She's an interesting fighter just because she seems like a chill person. No, I haven't. Maybe I'll go look that up. That's cool that she was invited to be on Joe Rogan. Rio, kind of an MMA question. What do you think of Tyson Fury going to Bong Tao to train for a couple of days? Is Bong Tao the premier spot instead of Tiger Muay Thai? That is a real... I would love to ask around, especially some of my friends that are living in Thailand or in Asia, to kind of see what the comparison is between Tiger and Bong Tao. Bong Tao seems like a smaller team. It's quickly growing, but it does seem like a smaller team than Tiger Muay Thai. Tiger Muay Thai is much bigger. They've got a lot more infrastructure. There's more that they can offer to the fighters in terms of breadth, but yeah, Bong Tao and Tiger definitely like maybe the top 2 MMA gyms in Asia right now. I'm not sure which one is better. I would love to just kind of get some feelers for that for sure. Let's see. And then James, how big of a win is Miller's over Oliveira? It was before Oliveira significantly improved, but it's also a big name that's on the record. Same situation as the Boa versus Zhang a few years ago. Yeah, that was kind of in Charles Oliveira's years where he was just kind of going back and forth. I actually remember that fight. I think, Charles Oliveira was this kind of this next big thing, young fighter coming up, and then Jim Miller fought him and beat him with a knee bar. And it was kind of like a shocking, like, veteran beating the younger guy scenario. I think that it's obviously not as big as beating Charles Oliveira today, but it's still on his record. I mean, it's a really good name. It's a really good name to have on there. But yeah, it doesn't quite mean as much. And then let's see. Should fighters be making call-outs after wins, no matter how silly some of the call-outs are? Like, say, if Patty called out Islam. Well, I think honestly, I really don't. I don't really care a whole lot about call-outs afterwards. If Patty wants to call out Islam Makhachev, then that's fine. Like, you can call out whoever you want, because like you never know how that reaction is going to be received. And who knows, maybe like by speaking it into existence, then that fight could kind of get the fast track. So Patty's not the one that like sends out contracts and does the matchmaking. But you can always try. I mean, if you want to call out the lightweight champion, then I mean that's great for you. Title fight means great business for you. It's good for your brand. I don't think that Patty should do that, or like I don't think that that would be advised to try and fight Islam this early into his UFC career. But I mean, you can call out whoever you want, and sometimes speaking a fight into existence is really good for your own brand, your own business, your paycheck. So honestly, I don't really mind personally. You said my thing is I've seen so much media say how important it is, and you have a different perspective, which is great. Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a way to spend that space really wisely. And if Patty were to call someone out like Matt Frivola or Drew Dober, like obviously those fights are much more likely to happen. And Islam probably isn't going to agree to a Patty fight where if Patty says that, you're most likely to hear a positive response from like a Drew Dober or Matt Frivola, and that fight could actually happen. So you do have to think through like, I have this space to use, and how am I going to spend it wisely? You can always just like roll the dice and see if you win big, but otherwise, yeah, I would say try and use it wisely. My thing is I've seen, oh yeah, you just said that. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Really appreciate all of you hopping in. I can't wait to get this video out, hopefully on Saturday, on how Asian MMA countries can build themselves from literally nothing into a global superpower. Look for that coming later this weekend. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate all of your support. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and we will see you next time. See you later.